Welcome back, Anatomy. This is actually the last video for our cardiovascular unit. So yay, we've made it to the end. I know this was a really interesting way to learn the cardiovascular system through the social distancing and remote learning. And I also know that it was a really big unit. So there was a lot of different information to take in. And so please go back, rewatch videos if you need to. Make sure you are comfortable with the material because yes, I know it was a lot. And so we are going to close out this unit just talking about the blood vessels themselves. And so often I think it's easy to assume that blood vessels are a little bit like a straw and they're just these hollow little tubes and there's not much to them. But as you can see from the image behind me, there's some quite complex anatomy that goes on here in what is part of a normal vein or artery. All right, and so as we talk about this, feel free to return back to this image from your text for reference as we discuss some of these features of these vessels. All right, and so veins and arteries are composed of what's called three different tunics. You have a tunica intima, you have the tunica media, and the tunica adventita. All right, and so the first one, the tunica intima, it is the closest layer to the blood. All right, so this is the innermost layer, and it's a slick layer of simple squamous epithelial tissue called the endothelium. All right, and it's resting on a basement membrane of connective tissue. And remember, basement membrane is connected to a thicker layer of tissue underneath, and that thicker layer in this case is called the lamina propria. All right, so again, we're working the three tunics or the three layers of the blood vessel and working our way out. And so this is the one that's closest to the blood, the innermost layer. It's called the endothelium, and it's resting on a basement membrane, which is connected to this lamina propria, which you can see if you go back to that video. I'm sorry, not the video, the picture from the previous slide. This entire tunica, is wrapped in a thin layer of elastic fibers called the internal elastic membrane. All right, moving up to the next layer, the tunica media. It's between the inner and the outer tunic, so it's in between this intima tunic and the next tunic. And this is composed of smooth muscle wrapped around outer coverings of elastic fibers. All right, and these elastic fibers are called the external elastic membrane. So we have an internal elastic membrane in the tunica intima, and we have an external elastic membrane in the tunica media. All right, and the third is the tunica adventita. And this is what blends into the surrounding tissue. So this is the outermost layer, and it's what holds the vessel itself in place. And there are nerves also present in this vessel, and they innervate the smooth muscle in and around this tissue. Larger blood vessels require blood vessels themselves, okay, because although blood vessels carry blood and nutrients and oxygen, they themselves are a tissue. They are made up of cells. So they also require nutrients like any other type of cell in the body. And so they are composed of living tissue and what's called the vasa vasorum. And the vasa vasorum is a set of blood vessels that specifically supply blood vessel walls with O2 and nutrients. All right, so even though the overarching job of all blood vessels is to provide nutrients and oxygen to all your organs and your tissues throughout your body, they also have to have their own supply, and that comes from the vasa vasorum. All right. Additionally, veins are much thinner walled than arteries. Okay, they still have the same three layers though. All right, so it's important they do have the same three, but they are a lot thinner, and it allows for more space for the blood. Roughly 2/3 of our body's blood is in veins at any given time as well. So the vast majority of our blood is in a vein throughout our body. All right, moving on, we also have what's called capillaries. You've probably heard of these before. The capillaries have no tunics. Okay, so these differ from the arteries and the veins, which have the three. They are only made up of endothelium and a basement membrane, and they have to be extremely, extremely thin to allow for gas exchange to tissues. Remember, these are those super duper thin, tiny branched vessels that are so microscopic that the red blood cells have to go single file through them. Okay, and so they have to be super thin like that and super narrow and tiny so that the gas exchange of oxygen and the waste product of carbon dioxide can flow via diffusion in and out of these capillaries. Additionally, you have something called an arteriole, which is the smallest arteries that still have three tunics. Okay, so this is maybe a little bit more unfamiliar term, and these arterioles are found between arteries and capillaries. So if you have a capillary and you have an artery, connecting in between them, you're going to find these arterioles. Additionally, you have what's called venules. Again, probably a little less familiar term for you. It's a small artery that does not have three tunics, but instead has only an endothelium, a basement membrane, and a few smooth muscle cells. All right, and these are found between veins and capillaries. So if you have a vein that's going to connect to a capillary, you're going to find a venule at that junction. All right. And lastly, these are just some of the major arteries and veins that your book has chosen to highlight. You are not responsible for learning these all, and there are obviously significantly more than what's pictured here. These are just some of the big main arteries. We've talked about the aorta. That's a huge one. You've probably heard of your carotid artery before. That's usually what people, when they're talking about their neck, that's a pretty big artery that if you were to nick, you probably aren't going to make it unless it's clotted really quickly because of its large size. Maybe you've heard of the deep femoral artery or a femoral artery going down in your leg. But all in all, these are the major arteries and veins. The jugular, internal and external. You have radial and ulnar veins and arteries as well. So familiarize yourself with this, but don't sweat it. You're not responsible for labeling this diagram or knowing where exactly every artery and vein is in the human body. Okay, and so just some final things to wrap up and note in regards to arteries and veins. Arteries and veins typically tend to travel together throughout the body. So where you find one artery, you're probably going to find a vein, and vice versa. There are more veins than arteries, as we said just a second ago. Roughly 2/3 of your blood is in a vein at any given time, so that should make sense because we have more veins than arteries. Arteries are all considered to be deep with many superficial veins, all right? And so these are deep in your skin, the arteries. So what you see on the surface or the superficial layer is your veins. The deoxygenated blood, or the blood that does not have oxygen yet, that has dropped off nutrients and oxygen and collected waste, is going to move into a venule, then into a vein. Okay? So that's, and same thing for the reverse with oxygenated blood with arteries and arterioles. Heart pumping does not pull blood back to the heart. I think that's a common misconception, is that the heart's pumping action is what's pulling that blood from your leg or your arm or wherever it is back to your heart, but that's not true. The pressure pulls blood along. So we're back to that concept of the pressure and the different heart relaxation and contraction and creating that systole and diastole pressure. That's what pulls along. Blood needs some help to move back to the heart, though, and that's where skeletal muscles come in, and the skeletal muscles squeeze those veins. All right, so your skeletal muscles actually serve a purpose in here in getting that heart pumping and moving back to your heart. Additionally, there are one-way valves in your limbs which keep blood from moving backward when it's squeezed. If you've ever had a blood draw, every once in a while, you'll have a phlebotomist who isn't very good at their job, perhaps, or they're having a bad day, and they sometimes will actually nick a valve in your arm, and then they have to like re-stick you because the valve can collapse, and that isn't going to be effective for getting either medication in or drawing blood out. I remember specifically being about 15 and hating needles, and I needed to go to the emergency room one night, and I did not want an IV put in my arm, but of course they had to, and she was like, "Oh, don't worry, like, I almost never mess up, you know, yada yada." Yeah, she hit a valve, she had to redo it. I was not a happy camper, even at the age of 15. I handle needles much better now. But, so that is present as well. At rest, all of the blood in your body, which is about 5 liters, completes this entire journey about every minute. So that's a pretty fascinating statistic. But your blood is, all 5 liters of it, give or take, are completing this entire journey throughout your whole body in just about under a minute. So that's a lot of blood flow. And your heart is constantly working and your blood is constantly moving. All right. And so we are closing out our cardiovascular module. That was the last of the notes, as I said, but we are going to tackle a assignment that I'm actually pretty excited about. I don't want to overcomplicate it for you guys or make it ridiculously challenging, but you have 2 options for this assignment, and I touched upon them in a Zoom call at least once or twice when I talked to most of you, so hang tight if I've already mentioned this, but you're going to have 2 options for this assignment. There is a wonderful, wonderful movie called Something the Lord Made. Contrary to the title of the book, or not book, but movie, it's actually not specifically like a Christian movie, even though the Lord is in the title. The title of the movie actually comes from a line within the movie that one of these doctors says. But this is an excellent movie. I watched it, and my parents have watched it, and some other people I know, and they've all really, really enjoyed it. It is a true story, and it does have to do with the cardiovascular system. So it is a true story about these 2 people here, Dr. Alfred Blalock and Vivian Thomas. And they are famous for a particular surgery that they coined back many decades ago. But the story outlines some racial issues that were present at the time of this, that this took place. And so it's a very interesting and very important story. And I don't think many people know that these 2 doctors exist. And so I think it's a great film for us to watch. So on that, we have 2 options. I have the movie, and I was planning to show it in class, and we would have all just watched it in school. That's obviously not an option at this point. So you have option 1, which you can rent or stream this film, and I have a worksheet that goes along with it. So much like we would have in class, you just fill out the worksheet as you watch the movie. The movie is available, I believe, for free on HBO, so if you're one of those families that has a lot of subscriptions to different things, you might actually have this for free, which would be great. If you don't, I would never require you to spend money or purchase anything, but it is available for rent or stream on several different platforms. I believe the cheapest is YouTube, actually, for rent it for like 30 days or 48 hours or whatever. I don't know how long the rental period is, but it's $2.99. So not super expensive. It's a really good movie. I actually think that your siblings or even your parents might enjoy it. Like I said, my parents really enjoyed the movie. So if you just want to turn it into like a family movie night and rent it for $2.99, it's a great story. Now, if you're not comfortable or mom and dad aren't comfortable with you spending the $2.99, or if you don't have a free subscription for the movie Something the Lord Made, then alternatively, you can choose to research both Dr. Alfred Blalock and Vivian Thomas and write a biography about 1 to 2 pages, give or take, on each. Either way, decide what you think you'd like to do, talk it over with mom and dad, whatever you need to do, and just email me whichever you think you want to do, and I will send you either the worksheet to go with the film or the directions for the biography that you need to follow. Okay? And so email me once you have watched this video and you are ready to pick an option, and then I will give you all of the details to come. All right, and with that, that is the end of this video.